Shavuos, like all Yamim Tovim, involves a lot of family time for people in Chutz La'aretz, people in America, England, South Africa, wherever you are outside of Israel. So you have 2 days of Yontif. There's going to be family time sitting around the table with the Suda. And one of the challenges people face is always, number one, bringing content, Torah content to the table. And number two, doing it in an enjoyable way. And number three, trying to keep everybody interested. So what we're going to do is we're going to share some interesting, what I at least think are interesting stories, and that people, parents, and people could share at the Yontif table to hopefully enlighten, inspire, and create a ruach of Yontif at the table. Shavuos, there are really two aspects of it that are spoken about. Number one is obviously the receiving of the Torah. And to that end, we will tell you a few stories about Torah learning, the importance of Torah, what Torah does to a person, that sort of thing. And number two is the Megillas Rus. The Megillas Rus, the Gemara asks, what is the purpose for Megillas Rus to have been written if we do not learn any halachas in Megillas Rus? And the Gemara answers that Megillas Rus teaches us the importance of chesed, the importance of loving kindness, how Jews, Jews do things for each other, and so on and so forth. So, without further ado, talk a little bit about Torah. The Gemara says, we say every morning, Talmud Torah Keneged Kulam, there's no mitzvah that is as important as Torah study. Every Jewish man has to have a set time for studying Torah, whether it's a Daf Yomi or a Chavrusa or his own private learning. Every man has to be involved in learning Torah. It's not only a mitzvah, it's the mitzvah. Talmud Torah Keneged Kulam, it's the biggest mitzvah. Now, the devotion and dedication that we find sometimes, and hopefully it will inspire us to be a little bit more connected and a little bit more devoted and dedicated. Rabbi Yisachar Meir was the Rosh Yeshiva of Yeshivat HaNegev, which was in the Tivot in the south of Israel. And he was one of the Gedolim, and he was absolutely fluent in Shas. And when he was a Bacher in Yeshiva, so Yisachar Meir had a very interesting schedule. His Shabbos preparations involved Thursday afternoon. He would learn the morning Seder in the Yeshiva, the morning session. After he would come to the Beis Medrash, he would then shower and change into his Shabbos clothes. He would come to the Beis Medrash Thursday afternoon, and then he would learn Thursday afternoon, Thursday night, and then he would do a Mishmar. A Mishmar is an all-night learning session. Now, nowadays, in many yeshivas, they have a Mishmar, which is about 45 minutes of learning and then Cholt. In those days, a Mishmar meant you stayed up all night and you learned. So Rabbi Yisachar Meir, every Thursday night, would do a Mishmar. He would stay up all night learning. But then, morning time, most people stay up night. The Shavuos night, you stay up, have a piece of cheesecake, and crash out for about 7 hours. Rabbi Yisachar Meir would get up Friday morning. He would go to daven. After davening, he would eat breakfast. Then he would go back to the Beis Medrash. And then he would learn all day Friday. And then, finally, Friday night, he would eat the Friday night Suda. He would eat the Friday night meal. And then, finally, he would go back and learn some more. No, he wouldn't go to sleep yet. He would actually go learn to the Beis Medrash after the Friday night meal. And finally, after that, he would sleep 6 hours till Shabbos morning. And he did that on a regular basis. That means it was 36 hours straight of no sleep, total devotion to Torah. Now, people sometimes think, well, yeah, sure, those are the Gedolei Yisrael. The Gedolim were so devoted, Rav Chaim Kanievsky and the Stipler and Moshe Feinstein. That's true. And we're not them. On the other hand, in Russia, they used to have a clandestine, before the Iron Curtain came down, there was a clandestine Balei Tshuva operation taking place in Russia. Russian refuseniks were becoming Balei Tshuva, they're becoming religious Jews under the noses of the communists, and Rabbonim and rabbis from the free countries would go and fly to Russia. There were secret missions. Rabbonim would go in, they put on a baseball cap and a t-shirt, and they would go and they would meet with these refuseniks, and they created a pyramid system. And one rabbi would teach, these Rabbonim would go, and they would sometimes teach up to 16, 18 hours a day. They were playing for keeps. And the Rabbonim would go and they would teach Torah, and then one Russian would learn it, and he would teach it to two people, and each one of those two would teach it another two. There was a pyramid system right under the noses of the communists. So one of the Rabbonim went to Russia. He met a 16-year-old Russian young man who had become religious, and this young man said to him, Rabbi, I have a halachic question I'd like to ask. He said, yes, what would you like to ask? Most people ask Rabbanim questions about forgetting Yalav Yovo in benching or dropping a fleishik spoon into a hot milchik pot, that sort of thing. The Bacher said to him, when I study Torah, I learn for about 6 hours at a stretch. And after 6 hours, my mind starts to wander. I have this problem all the time. After 6 hours, my mind starts to wander. Rabbi said, yeah, what's your question? He says, well, I then stand on my head. I'm a gymnast. I know how to stand on my head. The blood rushes to my head and it clears my head out. And then after 10 minutes, I'm able to get myself upright and then learn for another 3 or 4 hours. So Rav said to him, yes, what's your question? He said, I want to know if while I'm standing on my head, am I allowed to recite Mishnayos by heart? That was the shy question that he had. I mean, most rabbis have never heard that question from any. Most rabbis, 6 hours at a stretch, standing on your head, Mishnayos. So sometimes we think, well, it's the Gedolei Yisrael. Sometimes it's the ordinary man as well. That's the importance. That's a devotion of Torah. That's Gadol Talmud Torah, Yoser Me'atzolos Nefashos. Torah study is greater than even saving lives. And therefore, the importance of Shavuos, that we relate to the idea Torah was given, and we pick up our game just a little bit. In Eretz Yisrael, many, many years ago, probably 130 years ago, 140 years ago, right around the turn of the 20th century, there was a man who owned one volume of Shas. And it was, in the old days, they printed Masechta Rosh Hashanah and Masechta Beitza in one volume of Shas. This man reviewed this one volume of Shas. It's two short Masechtas, a total about 70 or 80 daf, but he chazered it, he reviewed it 3,000 times. And he had written on his tombstone, he was buried in an old cemetery in Tzfas, up in the north, and he had written on his tombstone, here is the resting place of Yankel Schwartz, who reviewed Rosh Hashanah and Beitza 3,000 times. Fast forward about 100 years, there's a young man, Yitzi, who's in a yeshiva, and he's struggling. And one day he goes up to the Rosh Yeshiva, and he says to the Rosh Yeshiva, you know what, I'm leaving. Learning is not for me. I'm out of yeshiva. And Yitzi leaves the yeshiva. The Rosh Yeshiva obviously tried to talk him out of it. He leaves the yeshiva, and I'm from Chicago, it's a yeshiva, and we drink pop. We drink pop in yeshiva, as opposed to soda in yeshiva. But that's what we do. And so this Yitzi leaves the yeshiva, and about 2 weeks later, he resurfaces, walks into the base medrash, sits down, and he starts learning like a house on fire. Rosh Yeshiva looks at him, doesn't say anything. The next day, Yitzi comes back, and again he sits down, and he starts learning like he's never learned before in his life, and he's just sitting there drilling away in the base medrash. Comes back the third day, finally the Rosh Yeshiva says, 3 is a chazaka. It's already, he's established himself. Rosh Yeshiva comes over and says, Yitzi, welcome back. What happened to you? You left here 2 weeks ago, you were gone. He said, I'll tell you. I was gone. And I started hanging around with my friends, and we started bumming around. And we went to Eilat. And then we went to Tel Aviv, and we went to Netanya, and we made our way north, and we were in Tzfas. And we were walking through an old cemetery in Tzfas. And suddenly, I saw a tombstone. And the tombstone said, this is the resting place of Yankel Schwartz, who reviewed Rosh Hashanah and Beitza 3,000 times. I thought to myself, wow, there are people who really take this stuff seriously. Rabbi, I'm going to take it seriously. Sat down, and he started learning in the yeshiva. Now you stop and think, 3,000 times to review Torah? That's a lot, by anybody's standards. Yet, that's a person who's devoted and understands how important Torah is. Rav Zelig Reuven Bengis was the head of the Badatz, the main, the Eidah Charedes Beis Din, here, the main rabbinical court of the Eidah Charedes Beis Din in Yerushalayim. Rav Bengis was a world-class Talmud Chacham, and he made a siyum on Shas. He reviewed Shas every 6 weeks. Every 6 weeks, he took a cup, made a l'chaim, he reviewed Shas, obviously moving very quickly. One day he called his family over, he said, I'm making another siyum on Shas, and this was 2 weeks after the previous one. The family members said, come on, you're good, you're not that good. 2 weeks for the whole Shas? So Rav Bengis said, no, this isn't my regular Shas siyum. You see, I'm a Rav, And as a result of being a Rav, I have to attend brises and weddings and unfortunately funerals. And whenever I go, sometimes there's 5 minutes here and until something starts and 3 minutes till the cab comes and 7 minutes here. So what I've done is I walk around with a pocket Gemara, and every time I have 3 minutes, 2 minutes, 5 minutes, 7 minutes, I go on in that Gemara. It's taken me 15 years. But in 15 years, I've made a siyum, that cycle, by grabbing 2 minutes here and 5 minutes here. And that reminds us of the story of the Chassam Sofer. They asked the Chassam Sofer, the great posek of the 19th century, how did you become the Chassam Sofer? What was it that you did to become the Chassam Sofer? The Chassam Sofer said it was 5 minutes. I became the Chassam Sofer in 5 minutes. They said, how do you become the Chassam Sofer? He said, every time I had 5 minutes, I learned. That's how he became the Chassam Sofer. So the importance of Torah is something that we know, but we always have to internalize it even more. It's a well-known story that in Radin, the Chafetz Chaim, in the local area, they had to build a hospital. So they gathered all the local towns together. The Chafetz Chaim Zatzal, he was there. And they needed, whenever you got to build, so you're going to need donations. They brought all the members of the local towns together, and they needed to start soliciting funds in order to build this hospital. One of the wealthy men who was at the meeting, he took a look, and he saw these two young Torah learners, and he himself was not somebody very respectful of Torah. And he very cynically got up and he announced, I will give 10 times what those two together donate. Trying to make the point that their Torah learning is not very valuable. The Chafetz Chaim got up on his feet, and the Chafetz Chaim said, you couldn't give 100th of what they give. Your money will provide beds for the hospital. Their Torah keeps people out of the hospital. And therefore, we always have to appreciate the importance of Talmud Torah, the importance of Torah learning. There's never a point where we could say, yeah, I've made it. I know, I learn enough, and I understand the importance of... No. We always have to add to our learning and add to our appreciation. The Rav Shmuel Birnbaum Zatzal was the Rosh Yeshiva of the famous Mir Yeshiva. Now, Rav Shmuel Birnbaum was a tremendous masmid. He was always learning. And one time he was on a plane. He was sitting there in his seat, and he had a Gemara open. And in the business class section of the first class section of the plane, there was an alumni of the Mir Yeshiva who was now a businessman, a very, very prominent businessman. And at a certain point, he had to walk back towards the galley all the way in the back of the plane. And as he walked past, all of a sudden he sees there's the Rosh Yeshiva. Rosh Shmuel Birnbaum is sitting there in the coach section of the plane. And he says, listen, he thinks to himself, I'm sitting in first class. The Rosh Yeshiva is sitting here. So he bends down and he says to Rosh Shmuel Birnbaum, he says, listen, I have a seat in first class. I'll switch with you, Rosh Yeshiva. You please go sit in my seat, and I'll sit in your seat. And Rosh Shmuel Birnbaum looked at him and he said, I don't need a seat in first class. I need a chavrusa. Ask the non-Jew next to me to go sit in your seat. You sit down. Let's learn. How's that for an upgrade? Surprises in the sky. Some people fulfill the dictum of lo b'shamayim hi when they get up there in a plane, so there's no Torah at all. No. Rav Shmuel Birnbaum, he learned all the time. Could you imagine the look on this guy's face, sacrificing his seat in first class to be able to sit down with the Rosh Yeshiva, which, by the way, is the ultimate upgrade. To be able to sit and learn Torah, and to learn Torah with Rav Shmuel Birnbaum is certainly an upgrade. I once had a personal incident. There was a shidduch I was involved with, and this shidduch involved a young man who had, there was a certain amount of baggage there, and a young lady who had some baggage. And the shidduch was very delicate. I had to speak to a certain Rav before someone else got to him. Otherwise, the shidduch was in jeopardy of not working out. So I called his house, and his wife answered the phone. This is back in the days where phones were attached to the wall, and people are actually, you were limited in your how far you could go when you're talking on the phone. And I called up, and his wife answered the phone. I think I speak to your husband. And she said, well, he just started learning with his chavrusa. Is it important? I said, well, it's pretty important because, we got the shidduch on the line. I got to get to him, otherwise the shidduch will be torpedoed. She said, are you sure it's important? I hate to interrupt him while he's learning. I said, yeah, it's basically pikuach nefesh. It's life-threatening, which is an expression we use flippantly. It wasn't life-threatening. I wouldn't have been able to get into a car on Shabbos and drive over to talk to him. But that's for a little bit of embellishment, we call it pikuach. So I said, yeah, it's basically pikuach nefesh. So I hear her walk away. She takes a few steps away from the phone. Then she comes back, picks up the phone, and she says, you know what? I think it could wait. Call back in an hour and a half when he's done. And she hangs up the phone. So I was a bit perturbed, more than a bit. And then I realized I wasn't upset with her. I was upset with myself because she had a greater appreciation for Torah and what Torah is than I do. After all, if he's not going to speak to me for it, he's not going to speak to the other person who calls him either. And for every little thing, we go, if somebody was cutting diamonds, would we go and interrupt them if he was cutting down? Would we expect somebody to close their store for this issue that I'm calling for? Yet when it comes to Torah learning, sometimes we're a bit, we don't appreciate the value of it. This woman did, and I took the Musar lesson from it. So I have all the respect in the world for her. And then later on, I did call him, and Baruch Hashem, the shidduch worked out. Rav Shach Zatzal, by the way, speaking of Torah and Torah learning, I think that one of the areas that parents sometimes struggle is when their own children are learning, especially Gemara learning. So I have, to that end, I have here a guide, a short guide called Helping Your Son Succeed in Gemara, which is just a few pages of what I consider helpful ideas when kids are in the developmental stage of learning Gemara in the cheder years, in the day school years, and even on into the high school years. And there's some very important ideas that parents perhaps could use and gain if anybody's interested. They're available at they're available for a fee at Dovid B. Kaplan. You could email me, Dovid B. Kaplan, B as in baseball, basketball, badminton, Dovid, D-O-V-I-D, B. Kaplan at Gmail. And it's $12 if anybody's interested. And it is extremely important that the kids, when they're learning Gemara, they succeed. And speaking of students of Torah, Rav Shach Zatzal was the head of the Panovich Yeshiva. So Rav Shach, the Rosh Yeshiva of Panovich and the virtual leader of the Torah world, he was known to be in the yeshiva all day long. He would be in the yeshiva, teaching Torah, learning Torah. Eventually, when he got a little bit older, Rav Shach became a public figure, and there were many Jews who came to him. The Jews came to him for advice, and Jews came to him with problems, and Jews came to him to ask for brachas. And eventually he told his Talmidim in the Panovich Yeshiva, look, I'm in the yeshiva most of the day. Between the hours, certain hours of the day, 2 and 4 in the afternoon, those are not hours to come to me with questions in the Gemara. That's when I make myself available to the public. Okay. One day, one of the Bachrim, he waits in the waiting room, and he walks into Rav Shach, and he says to Rav Shach, I don't understand this Tosfos. We were learning a hard Tosfos today. I don't understand. I need the Rosh Yeshiva to explain it to me. Rav Shach, with his characteristic smile, he said, Yosef, I told you that these are hours for the public. People. I'm in the yeshiva all day. If they ask me, this is for people who need advice. People have problems. So Yosef bursts into tears. He says, Rebbe, this Tosfos is my problem. Why is my problem worth any less than anybody else's problem? When Rav Shach heard a bacher relates to a Tosfos as a problem, Rav Shach said, a problem is something else. And he sat down and he learned the Tosfos with the bacher. Person sees Torah and appreciates the value. If a person had a different problem in life, like their electric bill was a little higher than normal, so that's a problem. They would sit down and work it out on the spot. That we would work out. A person sometimes is learning Torah and you have a Tosfos. I'm stuck on the Tosfos. All right, I'll check it tomorrow. If we really saw it as a problem and it was something important to us, so then we would invest a little more energy into taking care of that problem. Finally, the last story before the next one. is it's a little bit frightening, but it's documented, and it's something that is worth thinking about. It's worth thinking about. It's a little intense. There's a young man in Bnei Brak who went to see the Stipler. Now, the Stipler was known for his, what can only be described as Ruach HaKodesh. There were too many strange stories with the Stipler. And this young man walked into the Stipler, and he gave the Stipler his name on a paper like everybody did. And the Stipler looked at him and he said, "Do you have a brother living in Shikun Vision? It's a certain neighborhood in Bnei Brak." So he looked at him. He'd never been to the Stipler before. He said, "Yeah." He said, "Please tell your brother to come and see me." He says, "Okay." He goes to his brother. He says, "The Stipler wants to see you, brother." The Stipler wants to see me. I've got to be a mistake. He says, "That's what the Stipler said." This guy walks into the Stipler the next day, and the Stipler says to him, "Are you Chaim Kaufman?" "Yes." He says, "When you were learning in Kollel, were you in a certain Kollel a few years back in a certain Kollel?" He goes, "Yes." He goes, "Do you remember every Friday you used to go to a different Beis Medrash, and you and some of the other Kollel young men, you would learn in this other Beis Medrash?" He goes, "Yes." He's startled. How could the Stipler possibly know this? He says, "Do you remember there was a man who used to clean the floors of that Beis Medrash every Friday? And he would ask you guys to get up and move to the other side so that he could clean the floor, even though he could have cleaned around and through you. And he may inconvenience you, and he made you get up and go to the other side. They made you switch sides. You remember that?" I says, "Yeah, how could you?" He says, "That man came to me in a dream 2 nights ago. He said that in the world of truth, he has no rest in the world of truth because of the bittul Torah, the waste of Torah time that he caused semi-intentionally, because he resented the fact that he was cleaning and other people were studying Torah. And he has no rest in the world of truth. And he asked that you should gather those other men together, and you should go to his grave, and you should say you forgive him for wasting your time." It's documented. What can I tell you? It's a documented story. For a few moments, how much time was it? That's what a few moments of Torah learning are worth. And now finally, for the last Torah story that I'd like to share with you, it's a very beautiful story. The Ohr Somayach, Rabbi Meir Simcha, had a chavrusa. And Rabbi Meir Simcha and his chavrusa once were learning, the famous Ohr Somayach, one of the Gedolei Ador. And they were learning, and they got stuck on a piece of Gemara. And it was difficult. And they were stuck. Could you imagine a piece of Gemara if the Ohr Somayach was having trouble? So he and his chavrusa decided they're going to go off and they're going to daven. So they went off, each went into a corner to daven. And after they davened, they sat down at the Gemara again, and immediately the Meshech Chochmah figured out the Gemara. So his chavrusa said to him, "Why did you figure out the Gemara and I didn't?" And the Meshech Chochmah said to his chavrusa, "When you went off, what did you daven for?" "What did I daven for?" "Daven lahavinu lahaskil, please Hashem, help enlighten my eyes, help us to understand." "What did you daven for?" Meshech Chochmah says, "I daven that I should love Torah, ahavas Torah." So Chavrusa said to him, "What's love of Torah got to do with understanding a piece of Gemara?" Meshech Chochmah said to him, imagine there's a baby in a room, and the baby's screaming his lungs out, yowling like a banshee. And the bubby is there, and she tries to burp the baby. Baby's still screaming. The father walks in, he tosses the baby around, baby's still screaming. The older sister comes and tries to give the baby a bottle, baby's still screaming. Finally, the mother walks into the room, she listens for a second, takes the baby, sits down on the couch, cuddles up the baby, and the baby calms down. Meshech Chochmah asked the Chavrusa, why did the mother of all people know and understand what was bothering that baby and what the baby needed? The answer is because of all the people in the room, the mother loves the baby the most. If you love the baby, you understand the baby. Meshech Chochmah said, I daven that I should love Torah. If you love Torah, then you'll figure it out. You'll understand it. If a guy had for example, if somebody had like a brain teaser or a crossword puzzle or something, and you can't figure it out, and I put $100 on the table and say, now can you figure it out? Probably probably a lot easier, probably a lot quicker. Maybe not, but you'll certainly work at it harder because you love that money, so you'll figure it out. The Meshech Chochmah said, we love Torah, I'll figure it out. And that, my friends, I think is the first part of Shavuos, is receiving the Torah, and that we all daven, work, try as much as we can to love Torah, to appreciate Torah, and to increase our devotion and dedication to Torah. The second part of Shavuos that we always focus on is Megillas Rus. And like I mentioned at the outset, the Gemara says Megillas Rus does not really contain halacha. And the Gemara says, why was this Megillah written? And the answer is to teach us the value and the importance of chesed, of acts of loving kindness. You have the kindness of Rus, and you have the kindness of Boaz. And we learn from here the importance, the significance of chesed. So I just want to share with you a few chesed stories that maybe could help inspire a little bit at the Shavuos table. The first one is, there was a family living in Germany in it says right around World War One, and there was I think it was right before World War One. There was an American soldier stationed there, and this American soldier, Jewish soldier, he became a guest at this family's home on a regular basis. It was during World War One. He was a guest at this family's home in Germany, and then 20 years later. So we're talking about around 1937, 38. This family needed to get out. They read the writing on the wall. They wanted to get out of Germany. And the problem is they wanted to go to America, but they did not have, so in order to get to America, you had to have an affidavit. And things were getting hot in Germany, and they really needed to get out. And they didn't know how they're going to do it. And one day, when one of the members of the family was looking through a drawer, and they found a thank you note that had been written 20 years earlier by this soldier who was now living in Duluth, Minnesota. And as a result of that thank you note, which was a result of their kindness of bringing him into the home, they made contact with him. They didn't know anybody else in America. They made contact with him. He provided the affidavits, and this entire family went to the United States. I know descendants of this family, many of whom are serious Talmidei Chachamim and B'nai Torah. And it's all the kindness that they did, and that kindness came around to paid the dividends later on. In Israel, there was a couple who was, a young couple was heading to Bnei Brak for Shabbos, and they missed the last bus to Bnei Brak. It was late in the afternoon. They missed the last bus to Bnei Brak. So they had no choice. You missed the bus. They crossed the highway, and they started hitchhiking to go back to Har Nof. So a car stopped. Young man stopped in his car, and he said, where were you going? He said, we're going to Har Nof. We were actually headed to Bnei Brak, but we missed the bus. He said, really? He pulled off to the side of the road. He got out of the car, tossed the keys to the husband, and he said, here, take my car, drive to Bnei Brak. You give it back to me after Shabbos. Here's my address. I trust you with the car. I'll hitchhike home. And that's what he did. So some of the people there, I'll let you, I'll host you in my house, and I might lend you a little bit of money. I'm not giving you my car. And, there it was, without a second thought. That's the chesed. A Jew understands there's an act of chesed. It doesn't say, there's no limitations on how much, when. It's one of those things, she'ein lahem shiur. The Mishnah says, elu dvarim she'ein lahem shiur. There is no limit on the chesed, the amount and the quantity and quality of the chesed that we do. A very enjoyable, one of my favorite stories happened with the famous Ger Rebbe, the Imrei Emes. The Imrei Emes, with the Ger Rebbe, he once walked into the Ger Shtibel, and he saw that one of the Hasidim looked unhappy, rattled. So the Emres went to this Chassid and he said, Rebbe Yid, you look a little down today. What is it? He said, Rebbe, I forgot to bring my gartel for davening. So the Emres said, no problem. And he started taking off his own gartel to give it to the Jew. He said, here, take my gartel. So the Jew takes the gartel, and then he pauses. He says, but Rebbe, what are you going to do about a gartel? So the Emres said, my friend, you will fulfill the custom, the minhag of wearing a gartel, a beautiful minhag. I will fulfill a Torah command of doing chesed by allowing you to use my gartel. And the lesson is that it's always important to keep our priorities straight. This is a custom, this is a mitzvah. I'd rather wear the gartel, but I'd rather have the credit of a mitzvah saseh deoraisa of giving the gartel away. And we always have to keep our focus on what are really the priorities. The Rebbitzin Gifter, Rav Mordechai Gifter's wife with the Rosh Yeshiva of Cleveland, tells she was a refugee. She came to the United States, got out of Europe, and she was living with a family. She was boarding with a family in Seattle. She had just arrived, and it was their first Shabbos there. And she'd come in, this pure, lonely refugee girl. And Leil Shabbos, they had the meal. And after the meal, people started cleaning up. And she said to the Balabasta, is there something I can do? So the Balabasta looked at her, she said, yes, pick up a towel and start drying the dishes. Rebbitzin Gifter said that was the best, that was such an important act of chesed. She would have told her, no, you're tired, rest, sit on the couch. That would not have been the same as telling her, pick up the towel and do the dishes. Because when she said, pick up the towel and dry the dishes, that made her feel like she's a member of the family, no different than anybody else. And sometimes chesed could be such a subtle thing. You know, it often happens, one family invites another family over. Mrs. Cohn invites Mrs. Levin and her family over. Mrs. Levin says, oh, could I bring something? Mrs. Cohn says, no, don't bring anything. Just bring yourselves. And Mrs. Levin says, oh, could I please let me bring something? Now, Mrs. Levin wants to bring something. Mrs. Cohn doesn't want to take it. You know, Mrs. Cohn to do a chesed by allowing her to bring something. It's such a subtle chesed to allow her to bring so she could also feel that she's contributing and she's not only receiving. And sometimes chesed requires, it's like Rebbitzin Gifter's hostess, requires a little bit of subtlety, a little bit of thinking, a little bit of seichel to understand what's the real chesed here. I have a friend who was a Baal Tshuva, and he moved to a large community in the United States. After becoming a Baal Tshuva in Israel, he moved to a large community in the United States, and he was very concerned when he moved to this community that it's going to be difficult to be accepted in the community. It's an old established community. And he told me that the very first Shabbos he went to the shul. He davened there Friday night. And Shabbos day he came and he davened again. And after davening there was a kiddush. And at the kiddush a man walked over to him and he said, Shalom Aleichem, what's your name? And he was like, wow, somebody noticed me. This is unbelievable. And he was just really touched. He turned around with his plate of kugel, and another guy came over. Shalom Aleichem, you're new here. What's your name? And a third guy. He told me no less than 15 people approached him and said Shalom Aleichem. He said that day, that kiddush in shul, that first Shabbos, that was the soft landing he needed, and that made their entire adjustment smoother. That was how he felt welcome. How did he what he didn't know was that the previous Shabbos, when the Rav gave the drasha in the shul, the Rav said, Rabosai, when a stranger comes into shul, you have to go up to the stranger and greet him. He happened to be the lucky recipient of being the first guy who came to the shul, the first stranger after the Rav gave that drasha the previous week. So 15 guys came up to him. And how did he find out about the drasha? Because the 16th guy walked up, there was Herschel, the shul grouch, and Herschel walked up to him, stuck out and said, the rabbi said we have to greet strangers. So he said he laughed. He didn't care. He said he felt so good about being seen and being noticed. And that's a chesed that we could do all the time, is just to see people and to notice people, just to say hello, say good morning, something. That's such an easy chesed. There was a man, a Jew, who was working in a meat packing plant in Norway. And he got locked into a freezer. He got locked into a meat freezer. He was in this meat freezer about 5 hours. And this is a serious freezer. This man was finished. And he was ready. He was almost, that was it. After about 5 hours, he's close to passing out. All of a sudden, the door opens. The security guard comes in, says, I knew you had to be in here. Security guy saved him. What happened was the security guard said, he's been working in this meatpacking plant for years. Hundreds of workers. says no one ever notices him, no one ever acknowledges him. This one Jewish man, every day he would come in and he would say good morning, and on the way out he would say good night, good evening. The security guard said, I heard his good morning this morning, but I never heard his good evening. So I knew he still had to be in the building. And that little act of chesed that the Jew did, that's what ended up saving his life. In Israel, a few years ago, we had a blizzard. Now, a blizzard in Israel means there are about 2 inches of snow. But if you're living in Yerushalayim, it's enough to shut down the city. In the night of, the snow came down one night, it started. The next night, all the next day it was snowing, and there was a wedding that night. It was on the remote road in the Tamir Hotel, and it was impossible to move in Yerushalayim. There were no buses, there's no transportation. The Kala had to be brought to the wedding hall in a Hatzalah ambulance that had snow tires. The Chassan lived in the remote neighborhood, so he was able to slide down the road to get to the Tamir Hotel. But how can you have a wedding without guests? And it was impossible to get out. Word was sent out to the local yeshivas and seminaries that there's a chasna at the Tamir Hotel and the guests can't make it. Literally hundreds of bacharim and bacharettes ended up coming to the wedding. They trudged through the snow. There were so many people there to do the mitzvah, to be mesamech the chassan and kal, they actually ran out of food. Could you imagine a Jewish wedding and they ran out of food? That's the mitzvah of chesed. That's how Klal Yisrael relates to chesed. And finally, when Reb Moshe Feinstein was known, besides being the Gadol Ador, the Posek Ador, Reb Moshe Feinstein, there was a woman used to come to Reb Moshe, and she would ask him to write letters for her, or translate letters for her into Russian to send to her sister living back in Russia. Reb Moshe Feinstein was from White Russia, and she would ask Reb Moshe to write these letters for her. So one day his son said to him, Tati, you're paskening shaylas, you're paskening life and death situations, and is this really the best use of your time? And Reb Moshe Feinstein told us a rule. He said to his son, when it comes to chesed, first do the chesed. Afterwards, think to yourself, should I do it next time? Is it something to do? It's too easy to say no. It's too easy to talk ourselves out of it. That, it's not worth my time, it's not something I should do. Chesed is priceless. Chesed, it brings all the benefits. It's one of the mitzvahs that Peiroseiim ba'olam hazeh, v'akeren kayemes l'olam haba. And speaking of the chesed of weddings, by the way, they also have, for parents who struggle in shidduchim, parents who struggle with investigating shidduchim. I hear this all the time. Parents tell me that they're checking out a bacher, and they can't get a straight answer. They don't get answers, not getting answers. So to that end, I wrote a guide called Shidduch Investigation Questions for Parents. This is also available at Dovid B. Kaplan at Gmail. These are 50 questions, suggestive questions, but they're questions they're more to teach parents how to ask the question. When you know how to ask the question, you will get a straight answer. And anybody who is asked about shidduchim, it's a chesed to answer honestly and correctly. It's certainly a chesed to be involved in making shidduchim, and it's a chesed to do anything we can for other people. And as Reb Moshe Feinstein said, let's do the chesed. First we'll do the chesed, then we'll ask ourselves, should I? If I shouldn't have, next time maybe I won't. But the easiest thing is to say no. We don't say no. We say yes, that's chesed, that's a message of Rus, and everybody should have a wonderful Yom Tov.
Hi, this is Peretz Baruch Eichler, a proud alumnus of Ohr Somayach. Now what you just watched is one of the many programs that Ohr Somayach provides, leaving its impact on hundreds of thousands with so many more waiting to be reached. Ohr Somayach's central campus in Jerusalem has over 300 students presently learning there. And now you can be a vital part of spreading that bounty of knowledge worldwide by logging on to donate.ohr.edu. We can step up to the plate at this pivotal moment of Ohr Somayach's growth and bring the next generation of Jews home.